I sat across from him at the kitchen table, the same table where I once cut his sandwiches into stars. He didn't look up from my bank statements as he said it. "You're too old to understand this stuff, Mom. Too old, too slow, too stupid." That's what he thought. That's what he counted on. But what he didn't count on was that I still knew how to balance more than a checkbook. I knew how to end him, one receipt at a time. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The kitchen smelled faintly of scorched toast and dish soap. Maggie Hensley stood at the counter, her hands resting on a neat stack of printed statements. She adjusted her glasses, eyes narrowing just slightly as she cross-checked the latest figure on her monthly budget worksheet. Across the table, Kyle lounged with a smirk curled into the corner of his mouth. He swirled the last sip of his coffee like it was whiskey, watching her with the lazy disdain of someone who'd already made up his mind. "I already balanced everything last week," Maggie said quietly, tapping her pencil twice on the page. "Utilities came out lower than I expected. I even called the credit union and got them to waive that overdraft alert fee." Kyle leaned back, laughing through his nose. "Mom, you still use paper spreadsheets." His voice sharpened as he added, "You're too stupid to handle money." The words landed flat, then echoed in the silence. Maggie blinked. Her pencil paused mid-air. Tanya, standing near the fridge with her arms crossed like she owned the place, barked out a laugh. "Babe, be nice," she said, smiling without warmth. "She just needs a little help. Maybe it's time you got power of attorney or something, for her protection." Maggie's stomach gave a slow, cold turn. She kept her face still, letting their words hang like mildew in the air. She closed her ledger gently and stacked the statements with care. No retort, no flare of temper. Just silence and precision, the only defense she trusted when emotions started to burn. Kyle got up and clapped his hands together, satisfied with the final word. "Anyway, we're headed to the dealership in a bit," he said. "Looking at an upgrade. Tanya's car's making that knocking sound again." Tanya smoothed her hair and grabbed her purse. "And hey, Mom," she said lightly as they walked out, "don't stress yourself trying to keep up with all those numbers. It's not like you're running a business." The door clicked shut behind them. Maggie sat for a long moment, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the wind whispering against the kitchen window. She stared at the closed door as if it could explain how her son had grown into someone so proud, so careless with words, and worse, with people. Later that afternoon, Ruth Delgado knocked twice on the back screen door, then let herself in like she always did. "You didn't answer my texts," she said, eyeing Maggie as she wiped her shoes on the mat. "You all right?" Maggie didn't look up from the ledger she was rechecking. "Fine." Ruth narrowed her eyes. "I saw his car outside earlier." A long pause. Then Maggie said it like she was reading a line of numbers, each digit weighed and accounted for. "He told me I was too stupid to handle money." The screen door creaked in protest under Ruth's grip. "What?" Maggie met her gaze calmly. "His exact words." Ruth's jaw tightened. "That boy wouldn't know a balanced checkbook if it slapped him across the face." "They think I'm slipping," Maggie said, her voice low, almost curious. "They think you're easy." Maggie stood and smoothed the front of her sweater. She walked to the cabinet, pulled out a tin of cookies Ruth had given her last Christmas, and offered it. "Oatmeal raisin, you want one?" Ruth waved it off. "You should be pissed." "I'm focused." A beat. Ruth sat down, her voice softening. "What are you gonna do?" Maggie placed the tin back and turned, her tone steady. "If they think I can't handle numbers," she said, reaching for her notebook with that old, familiar confidence in her hands, "let's show them numbers they'll never forget." The next morning, just after sunrise, the neighbors were still asleep when Maggie slid into Ruth's passenger seat, a leather folder balanced on her lap and a look in her eyes that hadn't been there in years. She turned to Ruth and said simply, "Take me to someone who knows how to break a system without leaving fingerprints." The sun hadn't fully cleared the rooftops by the time Ruth's aging Corolla pulled into the cracked parking lot of a faded strip mall on the edge of Omaha's Midtown. A flickering neon tax resolution, bankruptcy wills sign buzzed above the front window of a squat office wedged between a vape shop and a bail bondsman. "This the place?" Ruth asked, squinting. Maggie didn't answer right away. She stared out the windshield, leather folder in her lap, one hand resting lightly on its worn spine. The door to Tran Legal Services creaked when they stepped inside. It smelled faintly of toner, cheap carpet glue, and something floral, like an old air freshener trying to compete with time. Behind a clutter-free desk sat Victor Tran, lean, dark-suited, and quietly watching them over the rim of a matte black coffee mug. No receptionist, no music, just the quiet tick of a wall clock and the sound of their footsteps. "You must be Margaret Hensley," he said, standing. "Maggie," she corrected gently, offering her hand. He shook it with a firm grip, nodding toward the two client chairs across from his desk. "Have a seat. You're here about your son." There wasn't a flicker on Maggie's face. "Yes," she said simply, "and his wife." Ruth slid into the other chair, arms folded, face already stormy. But Maggie's expression stayed neutral. That same calm, the one that unnerved Kyle more than yelling ever had. Victor set his mug down, pulled out a legal pad, and clicked his pen. "Start from the top. Tell me everything." She did, not with tears or raised voices, but with structure. Names, dates, numbers, mail she hadn't received, signatures she hadn't written, accounts she'd never opened. She spoke like a retired clerk auditing a department that had tried to bury its theft. Victor didn't interrupt, but his brow lifted slightly when she laid out her ledger, a marbled black notebook ruled in blue ink, the kind you'd find in a supply closet from a different decade. Every transaction was logged, color-coded, footnoted. "You keep this by hand?" he asked, thumbing through pages with reverence. "I don't trust apps," Maggie replied. "They crash. Paper doesn't." He chuckled softly, but his eyes didn't leave the numbers. "These entries are cleaner than some forensic audits I've seen." Ruth smirked. "Told you she wasn't some frail old lady." Maggie remained still, watching him the way she'd watched managers and auditors over decades, measuring the weight of their silence, their confidence, their calculation. When Victor looked up again, his tone had shifted. "You said he's tried to pressure you into giving him power of attorney?" Maggie nodded once. "And his wife?" "She's the one planting the ideas." Victor leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "I'd like to run a credit pull, on both of you, with your permission, of course." "I already brought what you'll need," Maggie said, unfolding a crisp envelope from her folder. Inside were her social security number, 2 forms of ID, and notarized authorization. Victor accepted it with the same care someone might use handling explosives. "You don't seem surprised by any of this," Maggie said after a pause. Victor gave a small smile. "Because I've seen this before, but not usually this organized." He glanced at Ruth. "Most people come in rattled. She came in ready." "She's been ready since last night," Ruth muttered. Victor stood, walked to a file cabinet, and retrieved 2 consent forms. "Here's what I think, Maggie," he said, sliding them across the desk. "Your son thinks he's clever, like he's got a system you'll never understand." Maggie signed the forms without flinching. Victor leaned in slightly, eyes sharper now. "But from where I'm sitting, he's building a house of cards." He tapped the edge of her ledger gently. "Let's topple it." Maggie didn't smile, but she did meet his gaze, steady, resolute. From the corner, Ruth cleared her throat. "You think it'll get ugly?" Victor's reply was quiet. "It already is." The mailbox clicked shut with its usual soft thunk as Maggie turned the brass key and pulled the stack free. Junk mail, grocery circulars, a folded utility bill, and one envelope already torn open, its seal ripped jagged, as if someone had opened it in a hurry. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she took the mail inside, set it on the kitchen table, and went to wash her hands, like always. Routine gave her thinking time. When she came back, she examined the envelope again. It was addressed to Margaret Hensley, not current resident, not Kyle Hensley. The return label read, Omaha Credit Union. Inside was a summary of recent transactions on a savings account she hadn't touched in over a year. 1 withdrawal, 2 new automatic transfers. Her breath didn't hitch, her pulse didn't race, but she did pull out her phone, held it steady, and took 3 clear photos, front, back, and contents. Then she slid the envelope into a fresh Ziploc bag, just like Victor had said. Keep everything. Don't confront unless it serves the build. But this time, it came to her. She heard the front door creak, followed by heavy footsteps and the crinkle of a fast food bag. Kyle. He wandered into the kitchen, tossing a crumpled napkin into the sink like it was a trash can. "Hey, you get that mail from the bank? I told them to reroute stuff here since it's confusing with the P.O. box and all." Maggie turned to face him, holding the envelope in her gloved hand like it was evidence at a crime scene. "This was addressed to me," she said. "And it was opened." Kyle didn't even blink. "Relax, Mom. You don't even use that account. Thought I'd help you keep track." She raised one eyebrow. "Opening someone else's mail is a federal offense." He scoffed. "Jesus, what are you gonna do, call the cops?" "No," she said, voice steady. "Not yet." He chuckled like she'd told a joke. "God, you're dramatic. It's family mail. We live in the same house." "Temporarily," she murmured. At that, Kyle's smile wavered. Just a flicker. "Look, you don't have to get all paranoid. Tanya and I are just looking out for you. You've been off lately." And as if summoned, Tanya drifted into the doorway with a soda in hand, face already set in a casual smile. "We're just trying to help, Maggie. These little things, they pile up if you're not watching." "I am watching," Maggie said, her voice soft but pointed. "And I remember everything I didn't authorize." Tanya shrugged. "We thought it'd be easier, no big deal." Neither of them noticed the faint click as Maggie locked her phone screen, photos saved and time-stamped. She let the conversation die there, no lecture, no drama. She simply took her ledger from the drawer and penciled in the day's date beside a new entry. Unauthorized mail opening. Bank envelope. A thin check mark followed, just one more notch in the column. That night, Ruth came by with leftover stew in a warm container and her usual no-nonsense energy. "They touched your mail?" she asked, after Maggie calmly relayed the day's events. "Tore it open like it was theirs." Ruth's jaw clenched. "Want me to talk to them? I can be polite, loudly." "No," Maggie said. "Victor says to build the paper trail first. I'm not jumping ahead." "You really think they're that sloppy?" "They're greedy," Maggie said. "Greedy makes you careless." Ruth gave a low whistle. "I don't know how you stay so calm." Maggie met her gaze. "It's easy when you already know how this ends." Later that night, she sent Victor the photos, labeled with exact times and annotations. Less than 10 minutes later, he responded. "Victor, excellent. Document everything, every detail. This will matter." As she closed her phone and turned out the light, she heard the faint ping of Tanya's voice down the hall, something about consolidating bills. Kyle was laughing again, easy, full of confidence. Let him laugh, Maggie thought. Tomorrow's mail would come with something new, and this time it was going to have his name on it. Victor Tran was already flipping through a thick manila file when Maggie walked into his office the next morning, Ruth right behind her with a coffee carrier in hand. He glanced up, his usual calm flickering into a smile. "Good timing. I was just about to call." Maggie placed the envelope on his desk, carefully sealed in the same Ziploc bag as before. "This came yesterday. The account was mine. The transactions weren't." Victor adjusted his glasses and opened the bag like it was evidence in a criminal trial. He didn't speak while reading. He just nodded once, slowly, then picked up his tablet and began tapping through a few screens. "Do you remember authorizing any loans recently?" he asked. "No." "Anything with AmeriFast Lending Group?" "I've never even heard of them." Victor's fingers paused. "Interesting." Ruth leaned forward, handing him one of the coffees. "Let me guess. Our charming Kyle's been busy." Victor pulled up a PDF on his screen and turned it toward them. "He used your home address to apply for 3 personal loans over the last 8 months. Same employer listed, same phone. He added a secondary co-resident on the forms. Your name." Maggie's jaw tightened, but she didn't blink. "He forged that?" Victor nodded. "Or he had someone else fill it out. Either way, it's tied directly to this address. That's why the mail came here. These lenders are using your ZIP code and residential verification to justify the rates." Ruth muttered something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like, "rotten little bastard." Victor continued, "I ran his soft credit file through a professional tool. Don't worry, legal on my end. He's got 5 open accounts, all in shaky standing. And Tanya's name shows up on 2. She said they were trying to help me," Maggie said quietly. Victor met her eyes. "They're helping themselves to your identity." There was a knock on the glass door. Victor looked up. Right on time. Officer Dana Whitaker stepped in, dressed in her pressed blue uniform and windbreaker, her presence somehow both grounded and no-nonsense. She greeted Maggie with a warm nod, then Victor with the familiarity of shared caseloads. "I asked her to stop by," Victor said. "Thought you might want things on the record now." Whitaker opened a small notebook, already scribbling the time and date. "Mind walking me through what happened, Maggie?" Maggie handed over a photocopy of the loan letter she'd printed at home. "I didn't authorize anything, but they've used my name, my address, my life." Whitaker's pen didn't stop moving. "You're not listed as an applicant on any of these loans, just as a co-resident. That's tricky but not invisible. We can flag it under fraudulent representation." Ruth let out a bitter laugh. "Tricky's his specialty. But subtle? He's never been that." Whitaker glanced at Victor. "Let me know when you've got a formal complaint prepped. I'll submit the misuse under identity proximity fraud." "I'll have it by this afternoon," Victor said. "We'll attach the affidavit to the state registry so future lenders don't use her name or address again without cross-checks." Maggie signed the affidavit on the spot, the stroke of her pen smooth and deliberate. When it was done, she passed it across the desk and finally sat back in her chair. "They think I'm just sitting around counting spoons," she said. Victor gave a quiet grin. "They're not counting on you being smarter than their best lie." Whitaker stood. "You keep building this case the way you are, Maggie? They won't just lose. They'll be flagged statewide." As she left, Ruth turned to Maggie, her eyes lit with admiration and heat. "He thinks you're blind," she said, her voice thick with contempt. "But you see every digit, every decimal point, every damn step." Maggie looked down at her worn notebook, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote a single line. "Loan activity, fraud trigger, Amerifast, Victor to flag, all records pulled." Then she closed it. Kyle didn't know it yet, but the math had just turned. Victor Tran didn't usually look rattled, but when Maggie and Ruth arrived that morning, Ruth carrying her usual thermos, Maggie carrying nothing but her worn notebook, there was a tightness in his jaw she hadn't seen before. He didn't offer coffee, didn't crack a joke. He just pulled a folder off his desk, slid it open, and turned the screen of his laptop toward her. "Maggie," he said quietly, "this is your credit report." She leaned in, expression still and unreadable. 3 open credit cards she'd never applied for, all maxed out. One had an outstanding balance over $6,000. Another was in collections. All of them opened within the last year, registered under her full name, tied to her social security number and her home address. "I've never seen these," she said. Victor nodded once. "They're fake. Someone used your information, probably from old mail or online data breaches. But here's the thing. 2 of them were used to pay car insurance for a vehicle registered to your son." Ruth let out a slow breath beside her. "Son of a bitch." "And 1 card's primary mailing address was changed last month," Victor added, tapping the screen, "to a P.O. box in Tanya's name." Maggie's jaw clenched, but her voice remained level. "Can you trace the IPs?" "Already subpoenaed through back channel. It'll take a week or 2. But we've got enough to file the initial paperwork right now." He reached across the desk and slid over a thick packet. "Identity theft affidavit, fraudulent account closures, authorization to begin a federal complaint. It's dense, but I've highlighted what matters." Maggie picked up the pen without hesitation. The scratch of it against the paper was sharp, decisive. Ruth stood behind her, arms crossed. They really thought she'd never notice. Victor looked up. "Most don't. They get away with this kind of thing because it's slow and quiet. $100 here, a new card there. By the time anyone notices, it's wreckage." Maggie signed the final page and set the pen down. "How long before they know I froze everything?" "By tomorrow. They'll try to log in or make a purchase and hit a wall. That's when things usually escalate." There was a knock at the office door. 3 measured raps. Officer Dana Whitaker stepped in, uniform crisp, clipboard in hand. She offered Maggie a respectful nod. "I heard we've reached the official case file part of the process." Victor gestured toward the stack of papers. "We're there." Whitaker pulled up a chair and got straight to it. "I'm filing under Nebraska's elder exploitation statutes. That gets us state-level oversight and locks in criminal penalties if we can prove financial abuse." Maggie's expression didn't shift, but her hand gripped the edge of the desk. Whitaker caught it. "You're not alone in this, Maggie. And the way you've documented everything, it's going to hold up." "I don't want a slap on the wrist," Maggie said quietly. "I want this on their record. I want it to follow them." Whitaker nodded. "Then we do this right." While Victor scanned in the forms, Ruth leaned down to Maggie's ear. "We should secure the house. You've got jewelry, old bonds, cash you don't keep in the bank. If Tanya's digging through envelopes, she might not stop there." "She won't find anything worth the risk," Maggie replied. "But you're right." Later that evening, they spent an hour moving valuables. The old metal lockbox went from the coat closet to a new hiding spot inside a fake vent cover Ruth had picked up from a hardware store 5 years ago for just in case. Maggie's remaining savings, actual cash neatly banded, was slipped into a hollowed-out Reader's Digest volume labeled Dog Breeds of the Midwest. "Only thing they ever read is credit limits," Ruth muttered. "They'll never look here." Maggie closed the book and set it on the shelf, wedged between 2 oversized cookbooks. Then she went to her room and opened her laptop. For the first time in years, she logged into her online credit monitoring service. The damage stared back at her like smoke from a fire she hadn't seen until now. But the alerts had stopped. The accounts were frozen. The complaints were filed. The paper trail was stacked. She was finally ahead. Her phone buzzed, Victor's name on the screen. "Victor. Tanya just called the AmeriFast lender. She knows the account's frozen. She's panicking." Maggie read it twice, then put her phone down and walked into the kitchen to boil water for tea. Let Tanya panic. Tomorrow Kyle would find out too, and his reaction would be far louder. It started with the slamming of the screen door. Not a gust of wind slam, not a careless nudge. It was intentional, the kind of slam that made the whole house jump. Maggie didn't flinch. She was already at the kitchen table, notebook open, phone face down beside her tea. A loaf of banana bread cooled beside her ledger, untouched. Kyle's voice echoed down the hallway like a cannon blast. "What the hell did you do?" She didn't answer. Not yet. He appeared in the doorway, face red, chest heaving, fists clenched, like he'd just lost a prize fight he didn't see coming. "You froze everything," he barked. "The lenders shut me out. I can't get into the auto draft. Tanya's account got flagged. You ruined everything." Maggie reached for her phone, quietly turned it over, hit record. The screen glowed faintly from her lap. "I didn't ruin anything," she said, her voice even. "I secured my identity." Kyle's laugh was raw, ugly. "Identity? You're paranoid. You're buying into garbage that doesn't concern you. You're not even in a state to make these decisions." "Try me," she said. He stepped forward, finger jabbing the air. "Do you realize what you've done? I had things in motion, plans." "That's the problem," Maggie said. "They were your plans, with my name." Tanya entered next, slower, arms crossed, face tight with fake calm. "She's confused," she muttered. "Ignore her, Kyle. She's unraveling." Maggie said nothing. She let the silence wrap around the lie like a spotlight. Kyle kept going. "You've sabotaged your own family." "Over what? Some letters? Some bank statements? This is your fault. You brought this on yourself." He knocked over a chair as he paced. The noise cracked across the tile. Maggie's thumb stayed steady on her phone. "I want access to everything again," Kyle shouted. "Today, or I swear—" He stopped when he saw Ruth standing in the side doorway, phone already pressed to her ear. "I'm on the line with Officer Whitaker," Ruth said flatly. "You keep yelling like that, and she'll come running with a cruiser." Kyle froze, breathing hard. "You're both insane." "No," Ruth replied. "We're just done being quiet." 15 minutes later, Dana Whitaker pulled up in her patrol SUV, lights off, radio quiet. She knocked once before letting herself in. "Everyone calm in here?" she asked, glancing from Maggie to Kyle, then back to Ruth. Kyle was sitting now, slouched on the couch, radiating contempt. Tanya hovered behind him, arms still crossed like a shield. Maggie stood and handed Whitaker her phone. Recorded from the moment he walked in. Whitaker took it, watched the timestamp, listened to the first 30 seconds. Her face didn't change, but she nodded slowly as she paused the playback. This is solid. Threats, intimidation, emotional manipulation. I'll log it under escalation tied to ongoing investigation. Tanya scoffed. She baited him. Whitaker turned. He took the bait. That's on him. Kyle muttered something under his breath but didn't meet anyone's eyes. I'm filing a supplementary report, Whitaker continued, and I'm adding a cautionary note to both your names. You show up here again in this state, you'll be leaving in cuffs. Neither Kyle nor Tanya replied. Whitaker walked out, recording in hand. As the screen door creaked closed behind her, Maggie sat back down and reopened her notebook. Ruth broke the silence. You okay? I am, Maggie said. He's not. That evening, Victor called from his office, his tone clipped but energized. He gave us everything we needed, he said. That recording? It's gold. It shows emotional pressure and financial control in the same breath. I've already begun drafting the civil damages claim. Maggie listened, the sound of her pen scratching notes. Also, Victor added, I flagged 3 more credit hits this morning, accounts they were planning to open before your freezes kicked in. Good, Maggie said. Let the door slam on them next. You're doing everything right, he said, and we're just getting started. As Maggie hung up, she glanced around her kitchen. Familiar, calm, full of the quiet she'd earned. Then her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. 1 new voicemail. She tapped play, Kyle's voice low and seething. You think you've won, but we're not done. Maggie stared at the wall for a moment, then pressed delete. She turned to her notebook and wrote her next entry. Voice threat. Saved, time-stamped, documented. Then she underlined it. Victor's office was quieter than usual. No client chatter, no humming printer, just the low tick of the wall clock and the soft scrape of Maggie's pen against her ledger as she reviewed a new stack of printouts. Across the desk, Victor was calm, focused, but there was a glint behind his glasses that hadn't been there before, something sharper. These are the preliminary damages, he said, tapping the document he'd highlighted in red. Unauthorized credit use, identity theft, emotional distress, potential restitution, civil fraud penalties, and we're not even factoring in lost equity from reputation damage. Maggie nodded once, her jaw tight. They never thought anyone would hold the receipts. He smiled faintly. Well, now we've got enough receipts to fill a courtroom. Just then, the door creaked open, and Ruth walked in holding a pair of takeout coffees and a thick manila envelope. Brought the good stuff, she said, setting both down. One's a vanilla latte with oat milk because your office is too serious to have flavor. Victor chuckled. I'll take it. And I brought you something too, she added, handing Maggie the envelope. Maggie opened it and found a stack of printed screenshots. Each one captured a different post from Tanya's public Facebook rant. My own mother-in-law stabbed us in the back. This is elder abuse in reverse. She's lying to the police. We're the victims. One post even featured a crying selfie with the caption, I gave up everything for that woman, and she froze our lives. Victor scanned the pages, shaking his head. She really posted this publicly? Didn't even make her page private until after it started spreading, Ruth said. I downloaded the whole thread before it got scrubbed. Victor whistled. They're handing me defamation evidence on a silver platter. Maggie didn't laugh. She just studied the printouts. This is desperation. Yep, Ruth said, taking a sip of her latte. And we get front row seats. As they packed up to leave, Victor leaned across the desk. I'd keep your valuables extra secured for the next few days. They've lost money, and now they're losing face. That's when reckless turns dangerous. They won't get near the house, Ruth said. They won't get near my life, Maggie corrected. They stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, the kind of clean Nebraska autumn that smelled faintly of dry leaves and cold pavement. Maggie took a deep breath, then paused, because Kyle's SUV was parked at the end of her block. When they reached the house, he was already waiting by the steps, leaning against the railing like he still had a claim to it. "Don't," Ruth said, voice low. "You want me to call Dana?" "No," Maggie replied. "Let him talk." Kyle straightened as they approached, face blotchy, eyes raw from some combination of rage and sleepless nights. "You made your point," he snapped. "You froze our accounts. You got what you wanted. Now give me the cash so I can fix it." Maggie studied him for a long moment. There was no apology in his voice, no shame, just the same entitlement wrapped in new panic. "You need money?" she asked. Kyle's shoulders tensed. "Yes." She smiled softly. "I already spent it." He blinked. "On what?" She stepped past him, climbing the porch slowly. "A lawyer." The door closed behind her. Inside, she moved to the kitchen, peeled off her coat and poured herself a glass of water. The calm returned like muscle memory, the stillness of a house reclaimed. Ruth entered a few moments later, grinning. "Did you see his face?" "I saw everything I needed to." The next morning, Maggie checked her email. Victor had forwarded a new alert. Tanya had posted a YouTube video titled, "The Truth About My Evil Mother-in-Law." Over 5,000 views, hundreds of comments, and one anonymous tip already forwarded to Whitaker about Kyle's misuse of elder assets. Maggie sat back in her chair, watching the notification ping again. They weren't just losing money now, they were losing control. Maggie's dining table hadn't seen this much action since Ruth's last Thanksgiving potluck, but now it was command central, covered in receipts, notarized letters, screenshots, statements, and photocopies, all neatly labeled and arranged in tight, color-coded piles. "Chronology is everything," Victor said, flipping through a tabbed binder already swollen with exhibits. "The timeline alone proves intent." Maggie handed him another envelope, photos of the torn mail, each print annotated in her tidy script. Dated, time-stamped, originals in the lockbox. Victor nodded, sliding them into a plastic sleeve. "If the judge has any doubts, this will clear them." "Good," Maggie said, "because I don't." Across the table, Ruth was clicking a ballpoint pen rhythmically against her notepad, the kind of nervous energy she rarely let slip. "We need to rehearse," she said. "You freeze up on the stand, they'll try to spin it like you're confused or unsure." "I won't freeze." "I know, but we still practice." So they did. For 3 nights straight, Ruth sat across from Maggie in the living room, rapid-firing questions with all the charm of a cross-examining bulldog. Maggie answered each one without hesitation, voice even, facts sharp. "What was the first sign of financial abuse?" "The redirected mail." "What's your evidence?" "Photographs, report from Officer Whitaker, credit report entries, Victor's investigation summary." "Why didn't you confront them sooner?" "I needed a full record. Emotion doesn't win in court. Numbers do." On the 4th night, as they were wrapping up, Ruth gave a small, approving grunt. "You're ready?" "Almost," Maggie said, closing her notebook. "I want this airtight. No room for spin." But spin was exactly what Tanya specialized in, because 2 days later, outside the courthouse after a pre-trial hearing, Tanya approached, heels clicking across pavement, lips painted in war paint red, phone in hand as if she were about to live-stream the encounter. "Nice little case you've got brewing," she said with that plastic grin she wore for social media. "You really think you're going to win?" Maggie didn't break stride. "I think facts matter." Tanya stepped in front of her, just enough to block the path. "We're going to bury you in court. All this paper? It won't save you. You're just bitter." Behind Maggie, Ruth started forward, but Maggie raised a hand. Calm, steady. "Not with numbers this clear," she said softly. Tanya's expression faltered, just a flicker. Then she turned and walked away, dialing before she even made it to the curb. Later that evening, Maggie sat on the porch while Victor called with updates. "We're done," he said. "The binder's complete. I've added supplemental exhibits, social media screenshots, call logs, financial forensics from their auto drafts. Nothing circumstantial. It all connects." "And the judge?" "Receives it in the morning. Dana's formal report is being hand-delivered with the package." As if on cue, headlights appeared at the edge of the street. A familiar cruiser rolled up to the curb. Officer Dana Whitaker stepped out in plain clothes, file tucked under one arm. "I figured I'd walk this in myself," she said, handing Maggie a hard copy. "No risk of it getting lost in the system." Maggie took it, her fingers brushing the seal. "You think we have a real shot?" "You're not asking for a miracle," Whitaker said. "You're asking for justice, and you've earned it the hard way." Before she left, she added, "By the way, Tanya's video was flagged for misinformation and taken down, twice. They're unraveling." Maggie stood at the edge of her porch as the cruiser pulled away, binder under her arm, the street bathed in the pale hush of early evening. Inside, Ruth waited with 2 cups of decaf and a folder full of practice questions, just in case. But Maggie didn't go inside yet, because from across the street headlights flicked on again. Kyle's car, parked, engine off, watching. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper, cheap disinfectant, and ego. Kyle and Tanya walked in like they were headed to a brunch reservation, polished, smug, overdressed. Tanya's heels clicked too loud for the small room. Kyle's suit was too tight across the chest, like he'd bought it for a version of himself that didn't exist anymore. Their lawyer, a stiff-jawed man with slicked-back hair and a binder full of posturing, gave Victor a dismissive once-over and muttered something to Kyle. Kyle smirked. Tanya smirked harder. Victor didn't blink. He stood calmly beside Maggie at the plaintiff's table, binder open, tabs in place, every page rehearsed. He was wearing his quietest suit, the one that made judges lean in because they knew he wasn't there to entertain. The bailiff called for order. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Karen Dorsey." Maggie rose, steady. Her hands didn't tremble. She looked smaller than she had outside the courtroom, her cardigan buttoned all the way up, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense twist. But the eyes were sharp as glass. The judge settled behind the bench. "Let's begin." Victor was first. He didn't gesture wildly. He didn't pace. He laid out the case like a forensic pathologist explaining a cause of death, methodical, brutal, and impossible to ignore. "Your Honor, this is not simply a case of financial mishandling or family miscommunication. This is elder financial exploitation, coordinated, sustained, documented, and deliberate." He clicked a remote. Behind him, the monitor lit up, scans of altered mail, screenshots from Tanya's deleted posts, forged loan applications, time-stamped credit card charges. "This isn't hearsay, it's evidence, verified, corroborated, unanswered." The judge didn't interrupt once. When Maggie took the stand, she adjusted the mic like she'd done it before. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. "I was a payroll clerk for 37 years, she said. "You don't work that long with other people's paychecks without learning to spot patterns." She described the timeline in plain, measured detail, her son's shift in tone, Tanya's manipulation, the mail, the withdrawals, the lies. But it was the quietest part that hit hardest. "I lost my husband 12 years ago. I grieved. I adjusted. I didn't ask anyone for help. And when I started to rebuild, they tried to take the pieces I had left." The courtroom was still. Victor asked her gently, "Why didn't you go to the police sooner?" She looked directly at Kyle. "Because I kept hoping they'd stop before I had to." Tanya's attorney stood, confident and smug. "So you admit, then, you were aware of activity and chose not to act?" Victor rose before the judge could respond. "Objection. Mischaracterizes motive and presumes guilt in the plaintiff's caution." "Sustained." Tanya was next. She strutted to the stand in a tailored blazer and a look that screamed, "I'm the victim." But 5 minutes in, the cracks showed. She contradicted herself, first saying Maggie had approved everything verbally, then claiming they weren't even aware of the accounts. Victor pounced. "Which is it, Mrs. Hensley? You were given verbal approval, or you never saw the accounts?" Tanya fumbled, voice rising. She didn't care about the money. She let us help." "And how often did she say that in writing?" "She doesn't do writing." Victor raised a brow. "Except for this?" He held up Maggie's ledger, passed it to the clerk. Exhibit E. Tanya paled, but the explosion came from Kyle. He shot up from his seat, red-faced, jaw tight. "You're making her look like a saint!" The judge pounded her gavel. "Mr. Hensley, sit down." Kyle didn't. She was supposed to give it all to me, he yelled. It's not stealing if it's already yours. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Victor didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Neither did Maggie. The judge looked over her glasses, calm but ice cold. Thank you, Mr. Hensley. That will be noted in the transcript. Kyle sat slowly. Tanya was frozen beside him. And Maggie? She folded her hands in her lap and stared straight ahead, unmoved. Outside the window, storm clouds gathered low and gray over Omaha. Inside the courtroom, the reckoning had begun. 3 days after the courtroom blow-up, Maggie sat in a quiet corner of the county courthouse, binder on her lap, sweater buttoned tight. The fluorescent lights above her flickered slightly, cold, institutional, uncaring. But she waited with the stillness of someone who knew what was coming. Ruth sat beside her, sipping coffee from a paper cup and scanning headlines on her phone. They printed it, she said, holding up the screen. Omaha man erupts in courtroom. She was supposed to give it all to me. Maggie didn't smile, but her eyes narrowed, satisfied. Across the hall, a door opened. Officer Whitaker emerged, holding a thick manila folder tucked under one arm. Her pace was measured, her uniform crisp. She stopped in front of Maggie, gave her a nod, and said, "The DA's seen enough? They're moving forward." Ruth leaned in. "What's the charge list?" Whitaker pulled out a small pad and read, calm as ever. 3 counts of identity theft, 2 counts of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and obstruction. Tanya tried to delete digital records. Bad move. Maggie exhaled slowly. Will they be arrested? They're being notified today. Formal charges, court summons, restraining order expansion. This isn't over, but we're on a fence now. As Whitaker handed the folder to Maggie, Ruth let out a low whistle. Hope they kept the tags on those suits. Victor's office that afternoon was less strategy and more surgical precision. Civil and criminal, he said, pacing slowly in front of the window, sun slicing across his desk. Parallel tracks. We file the civil suit for damages, full restitution, fees, reputation harm. But now the state has enough to file criminal charges independently. We step back and let them carry that baton. He flipped open his laptop, already typing. Tanya tried to call me yesterday, he added. Left a voicemail. Sounded desperate. She knows it's real now, Maggie said, not looking up from her notebook. She always thought she'd wriggle out. Ruth snorted. They always do until the door locks from the outside. Victor paused. If either of them tries to contact you again, don't respond. Forward it. Every word, every text period. They won't get to me, Maggie said. Just then, Victor's phone buzzed. He picked it up, frowned, then turned on the speaker. Tanya's voice, shrill, tear-soaked. Please, can we talk? I didn't know what Kyle was doing. I just wanted us to be okay. I didn't mean for this to happen. Can you just, please, I'll do anything to make this right. The line went dead. Silence hung in the office like thick fog. Victor locked the phone. You heard it. That's not a defense, that's panic. She wants leniency, Ruth said. She thinks this is still negotiable. It's not, Victor replied, and the DA isn't entertaining it either. Maggie closed her binder and stood, slow and deliberate. No deal. Ruth looked over at her, quiet for a long beat. Then she said softly, You know this isn't just about you anymore, right? Maggie turned toward her. What they did, it's what happens to people like you. Quiet, polite, responsible. They count on you to be too ashamed to speak, to be afraid. But you spoke up. You fought. You documented everything. I didn't want to make it public. You didn't. They did. Victor nodded, folding his arms. When this is over, Maggie, your case is going to be used in fraud seminars, legal briefs, ethics courses. You've built something bigger than you realize. Maggie didn't answer right away. She looked out the window at the Omaha skyline. Small but steady. There was a chill in the wind now, a hint of the season turning. Change had come. They said I was too stupid to handle money, she said, voice steady. I think they're about to learn what stupid really looks like. Ruth's phone buzzed. She checked it, eyes widening. You want a kicker? What? They're officially listed in the state system, Kyle and Tanya Hensley, under pre-trial monitoring. Their assets are being flagged for potential seizure. Maggie raised her eyebrows slightly. And they don't even know what's still coming. Victor looked up from his laptop. Number, but they will. The news of Kyle's firing hit mid-morning. It came as a brief email from Victor with the subject line, "Update, he's out." Maggie opened it at her kitchen table, steam curling off her coffee. The message was short. Subpoena reached his employer. They didn't like what they saw. Terminated this morning. Cause, reputational harm and pending litigation. Severance revoked. She didn't smile, but she did close the laptop slowly, her fingers resting on the lid like it was the final page of a very long chapter. By noon, Tanya was live on TikTok. Ruth came over with soup and sourdough and held up her phone like she was reporting battlefield intel. "She's crying in her car," she said, half amused, half disgusted. #, mother-in-law from hell period. On the screen, Tanya sniffled dramatically, mascara smudged. "She took everything from us," Tanya sobbed. "We're homeless. Kyle's been fired. We're being targeted and harassed just because we tried to help someone who clearly wasn't well. If anyone can send money just to get us through, my Venmo is in the comments." Ruth shook her head. A scammer to the bitter end. "She's not asking for help," Maggie murmured, watching the video. "She's fishing for sympathy and cash flow." "She's not getting either," Ruth said. "Not this time." 2 days later, Victor stood in front of the courthouse with a folder thick as a telephone book. He handed it to the court clerk, pressed a thumbprint of confirmation, and said the words Maggie had been waiting weeks to hear. "We're filing for full restitution." He sent Maggie the confirmation from the courthouse steps. "Filed. Everything they took, everything they touched, it's in the suit, and we've asked the court to freeze any GoFundMe or digital crowdfunding under their names pending fraud investigation." When Maggie read it, she exhaled so deeply it felt like a weight had peeled off her shoulders, but there was still one final thread to sever. That afternoon, she walked into the leasing office of her housing development. The clerk, a young man with a buzz cut and a bored expression, looked up as she handed over a notarized form. "I'm removing someone from my household file," she said, "effective immediately." He scanned the form. "Kyle Hensley?" "Yes." He squinted at the page. "Looks like he was added a while back." "I was pressured." The clerk nodded as if he heard that sort of thing more often than he'd like to admit. "We'll update the lease by close of business today. You're the sole occupant again, ma'am." "Thank you." It wasn't until she stepped back out into the wind, cold now, pushing hard across the parking lot, that she allowed herself a single breath of relief. It was done. By the time Kyle's U-Haul arrived 3 days later, the neighborhood was unusually quiet. Ruth sat beside Maggie on the porch, a blanket over both their laps, thermos of coffee between them. The truck backed into the driveway with a shudder, its muffler coughing like it didn't want to be there either. Kyle climbed out alone. His face was thinner. He moved slower. There was no swagger left in his walk, just a bitter kind of efficiency. He didn't even knock, just started loading plastic bins into the truck bed. One of them cracked open when he dropped it. A tangle of extension cords spilled out like snakes. From the other end of the block, a cruiser rolled to a slow stop. Officer Whitaker stepped out, leaned against her doorframe, and nodded toward the house. "Enforcing the restraining distance," she said to no one in particular. "Standard procedure." Ruth waved. Maggie just watched. At one point, Kyle glanced toward the porch. Their eyes met, briefly, but there was no hatred in his gaze, no apology either. Just emptiness, like he'd finally realized the game was over and he'd never really known the rules. The truck pulled away 20 minutes later, its tailgate rattling loose. Ruth sipped from her thermos. "That the last we'll see of him?" Maggie didn't answer right away. Then, "No, there's still court." "And after that?" Maggie looked toward the empty street, her voice steady. "After that, I won't see him, but he'll see me, every time a background check comes back red." The courtroom was still when the judge returned. Even the air felt held, suspended between heartbeats. Maggie sat with her hands folded gently in her lap, her worn ledger tucked beside her like armor. Across the aisle, Kyle picked at a hangnail and stared at the floor. Tanya sat rigid, lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. Their lawyer whispered something they didn't seem to hear. Judge Dorsey adjusted her glasses, cleared her throat, and began. After review of submitted evidence, witness testimony, financial documentation, and supplemental investigations filed under state fraud enforcement, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Margaret Hensley. Ruth exhaled sharply beside her, the sound quiet but full of impact. Victor remained still, his expression a portrait of composed satisfaction. The judge continued, voice steady, final. Restitution in the full amount of damages is hereby awarded, legal fees to be paid by the defendants, wage garnishment to be enforced for Kyle Hensley until debt is satisfied. Tanya Hensley is held jointly liable under the basis of conspiracy and participation in fraudulent financial activity. All previous restraining orders remain in effect. Maggie didn't move, didn't blink, just listened. This court also directs credit repair services, at the defendant's expense, to restore the plaintiff's records and remove all fraudulent activity. Her accounts will be sealed with two-step verification and flagged for future monitoring. It was done. Just like that. The gavel hit once, sharp, echoing. It wasn't a gunshot. It was a clean break. Victor leaned toward Maggie and whispered, "We won." Maggie looked at him. We finished. By the time they stepped out into the crisp afternoon light, a small crowd had gathered. Not media, neighbors. Mrs. Callahan from 3 houses down. Greg, the retired firefighter with a limp and a love for lawn trivia. Even shy Angela from the credit union branch was there, holding a handmade sign that read, "Justice is additive." Ruth beamed beside Maggie. "Guess word got around?" "Guess so." Victor leaned in. "This was never just about court, Maggie. You gave people a blueprint." A few people clapped. Others offered quiet nods, but no one cheered. It wasn't that kind of victory. It was solemn, earned. A reckoning, not a celebration. That evening, Ruth hosted a dinner in her backyard under a string of warm Edison bulbs and a hand-painted sign above the picnic table. Numbers don't lie. There was roast chicken, cornbread, and Ruth's famous blackberry cobbler. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of gratitude and neighborly loyalty. No speeches, just laughter and comfort, and a few long looks of respect that said more than words ever could. Toward the end of the night, as the sun gave way to starlight, Ruth tapped a fork against her iced tea glass. "I think we all know what this toast is about," she said, "but I'm not the one who should give it." Everyone turned to Maggie. She stood slowly, her shoulders square, her face calm. She raised her glass of sparkling cider. "To every number I recorded," she said, "to every digit they thought I wouldn't understand, to the ink that told the truth when the lies were loud." She looked around, her eyes settling on Ruth, then Victor, then back toward the street she'd defended inch by inch. "To the math that saved me." The glasses clinked in quiet unison. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once. Someone turned on a porch light. The night pressed in soft around them. Later, as she washed dishes by hand, her choice, Maggie saw the email come in. Subject, final credit report updated, verified clean. She didn't open it, didn't need to. Ruth peeked in through the screen door. "You know there's one thing left, right?" Maggie looked over. Ruth grinned. "Bankruptcy court, and I hear Kyle's name is at the top of the docket." Maggie dried her hands and reached for her notebook. She flipped to a fresh page, wrote one word at the top, "bankruptcy," then underlined it. The bankruptcy hearing was held in a windowless courtroom that smelled of processed paper and permanent consequence. Maggie didn't need to be there, Victor had assured her of that, but she came anyway. Sat quietly in the second row with Ruth beside her, her ledger tucked under her arm like a talisman. They weren't here to fight anymore. That part was over. Now they were here to witness collapse. Kyle sat hunched at the defendant's table in an ill-fitting gray suit, darker circles under his eyes than last time. Tanya wasn't with him. According to the docket notes, she'd been dropped from the joint filing. Her own separate debt spiral had already taken her job, her leased Lexus, and most of her online clout. Her Venmo campaign had been flagged and frozen. The last Ruth had seen, she was couch surfing somewhere near Lincoln, still blaming toxic family dynamics. The trustee, a stern woman with thin-framed glasses and zero patience, flipped through the report like it personally offended her. "Mr. Hensley, do you understand this filing marks a permanent public record of insolvency?" Kyle's nod was nearly invisible. "Do you also understand that the restitution judgment from your civil case is non-dischargeable?" He didn't respond. The trustee leaned forward. "You cannot wipe away fraud, Mr. Hensley. Bankruptcy does not forgive willful exploitation." Ruth whispered, "Oof." That was almost biblical. Victor didn't smile, but he leaned slightly toward Maggie. "He's not just broke," he murmured. "He's branded." After the gavel came down, the court clerk handed Maggie a small envelope, her first restitution check. It wasn't the full amount yet. It would trickle in slowly, paycheck by garnished paycheck. But it was proof. Official, undeniable proof that the numbers she'd spent months tracking now had weight behind them. That night, she placed the check on her mantel between a photo of her late husband and a faded souvenir from the Grand Canyon. Not to frame it, not to flaunt it, just to acknowledge the full arc of what they'd tried to take and failed. The next afternoon, Maggie was on her porch, sipping tea and organizing envelopes, when Officer Whitaker pulled up in her cruiser. She stepped out with a small, unmarked folder in hand. No uniform this time, just jeans, boots, and a contented smile. "You have a minute?" she asked. "Always." They sat together on the porch swing while Maggie flipped through the folder. Final reports, filing confirmations, sealed record certifications, every page a closing line in a chapter Kyle had thought he'd be writing. "Officially," Whitaker said, "you're clear. Fully restored, identity protected, accounts locked tight. They won't be able to touch a cent, a document, or a breath of your life again without leaving a legal fingerprint." Maggie nodded once, quietly absorbing the finality of it. Whitaker looked out across the lawn, the wind rustling the dead leaves into motion. "You rewrote the rules, Maggie, for more people than you'll ever know." Maggie smiled faintly. "I didn't rewrite anything. I just remembered where I kept the pen." As Whitaker stood to leave, Ruth emerged from the house with 2 glasses of lemonade and a look of total, unfiltered pride. She threw one arm around Maggie's shoulders, pulled her in close, and grinned. "Too stupid?" she said, voice thick with warmth. "Please, you outsmarted him in every column." They sat that way for a long time, 3 women on a porch, sipping something sweet while the world turned quietly around them. Later that evening, Maggie went inside and opened her desk drawer. Inside, her ledger, neatly closed now, rested beside a stack of labeled folders and a slim USB drive with copies of every report, photo, statement, and recording she'd ever submitted. Not for revenge, for reference. She glanced once at her old calculator, the one with the fading buttons and the worn-down equal sign. Then she walked into the kitchen and slid her new restitution check into a slim envelope marked Final Ledger Closeout. She poured herself a glass of cider and sat at her table, letting the hum of the refrigerator fill the silence. Then the mail slot clicked. 1 envelope. No return address. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a scribbled line across the center. "I lost everything because of you." Maggie read it once, then calmly fed it through the shredder. The conference room at the Omaha Community Center wasn't large, just folding chairs, a few too bright overhead lights, and a stale pot of coffee on a back table. But the place was full. Not packed like a protest or parade, but full in that way that mattered. People had come to listen. Maggie stood at the front, her hands resting lightly on the podium. Behind her, a projector screen displayed a single title slide, "Protecting What's Yours, Fraud Prevention for Seniors." Victor sat in the front row next to Ruth. Officer Whitaker leaned against the wall near the back, arms folded but smiling with quiet approval. "I'm not a lawyer," Maggie began. "I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not even what some people would call computer savvy." A few chuckles. "What I am is a woman who kept records, who trusted her gut, who knew the difference between kindness and control." She clicked the remote. A slide appeared, her own handwritten ledger, scanned and blown up. Rows of tiny, perfect numbers, notations in blue ink. I wrote everything down because it helped me think, and when I started seeing things that didn't add up, I didn't throw the book away. I turned the page and kept going. From the third row, a younger woman raised her hand, early 30s maybe, wearing a cardigan and the tired eyes of someone who'd been shouldering too much for too long. "How did you not give up?" she asked softly. "When it was your own family?" Maggie looked right at her. "Because giving up doesn't stop them. It just gives them more room." There was no applause, just a stillness that felt like truth. Afterward, people lined up to shake her hand. Some offered quiet stories of their own, sons, nieces, even friends who'd borrowed until nothing was left. One woman hugged her and whispered, "You made it feel survivable." Outside, Ruth handed her a newspaper she'd picked up that morning, folded on the front seat of her car, already dog-eared. Senior outsmarts son in courtroom showdown. Below it, a black and white photo of Maggie walking out of the courthouse, ledger in hand, head held high. "Local celebrity?" Ruth teased. "You want me to laminate it?" Maggie gave a small laugh. "Frame it next to your numbers don't lie sign." Victor caught up with them a few minutes later, holding a sleek envelope with the community center's logo on the front. "They want to bring you on," he said, handing it over. "Part-time, volunteer role, fraud education outreach. You'd help develop training, lead workshops, maybe even sit on a prevention board." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "Victor, I just finished a war." "And now," he said, "you get to teach peace." She took the envelope, didn't open it, just nodded once, slowly. "Maybe I do." 2 nights later, Maggie was organizing files at her desk when the mail slot clinked. Another envelope, pale lavender this time. Slanted, overly perfumed handwriting. "Tanya." Ruth, passing by with a tray of laundry, paused at the sound. "That her?" Maggie didn't answer. She walked calmly to the kitchen, took the envelope,